No, yo estoy bien, estoy bien, sí, sí. All right, guys, how's it going? I'm Oscar. I'm going to present today a little bit of a open-ended presentation. I'm an engineer, I run a small business, and thinking a lot about how the businesses of the future might use Bitcoin. You know, the whole Bitcoin standard situation, what does it look like actually in practical terms? Coordinating human resources with Bitcoin is the name of the talk. So yeah, blue sky, right? So blue sky is not necessarily grounded in reality, but it's like a curiosity-driven kind of research thing. I just have a bunch of ideas, and maybe they're all terrible, but maybe some of them stick, and I can, maybe develop them a little bit more. But it's going to be a little bit of a technical Bitcoin knowledge sprinkled in there, just because it helps build some intuition. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Some of the topics I want to cover: what is a company business employment? Getting terminologies down, I think, is going to help. Bitcoinized employment, Bitcoinized investment, business relationships. What does this look like on a Bitcoin standard? Running a node for your business might be involved. Building a Bitcoin treasury, I think, is the most obvious one. Paying bonuses in BTC. I actually do some of this stuff for my own business, so it is a little bit of firsthand examples, but not all of it is, and we'll see. Again, there might be all terrible ideas. You want to be careful with privacy and block space in particular. It's going to make sense a little later, but not everything needs to go on the blockchain. Don't forget that. So what is a company? Wikipedia, formal definition here. It's a legal entity representing an association of people, whether natural, legal, or a mixture of both, with a specific objective. Company members share a common purpose and unite to achieve specific declared goals. Cool. If anyone works at a company or a startup, that makes sense. Does Bitcoin change any of this? Maybe. Do legal entities become UTXOs? Like, is that what represents something like a company? Does a company have to run a Bitcoin node to be like an economic participant in the global economy? Who knows? Maybe. That's what we're exploring here. What is employment? Relationship between two parties, regulating the provision of paid labor services. Based on a contract, the employer is paying the employee in return for carrying out assigned work. This one's a tricky one. Sometimes, if you're a contractor versus you're an employee, it comes more on the contractor side when you're negotiating, right? Like, honestly, as an employee, you are just basically, you start work and usually paid on the back end, right? So hopefully the employer doesn't, run away, but they have legal obligations, right? That we don't see that happen because we have systems in place that are going to stop employers from rug pulling their employees and not paying them. Obviously, that doesn't happen. But again, does Bitcoin change any of this? I think there's some ideas here to explore in terms of contracts being lightning channels. Can we stream salaries one day per hour of work, per day of work? Can it be more granular since we're not constrained by legacy banking, paychecks, ACH, things like this? So yeah, lightning channel is technically a smart contract, and is it smart enough to take over, or I guess regulate the provision of paid labor services? Maybe not, but I think with some additional software and automation, maybe. So a business, practice of making one's living or making money by producing, buying, or selling goods. I don't think this is going to change. Bitcoin's not really going to change this. The only thing is maybe that making money will actually mean earning money, and there's not going to be a small group of people that can make money in exchange for nothing. So central banking is obviously has a corrosive effect on people who actually have to work for their money. So, at best, Bitcoin might affect a little bit of that. Going to jump into this a little bit. Bitcoin transactions 101, just in case people don't know. Again, just to build the intuition here for some of these upcoming ideas. Every Bitcoin transaction contains inputs and outputs. Inputs represent the source of funds, where funds are coming from. Outputs include the amount of Bitcoin that's going to the address you're sending to, and actually the locking script. And that defines the spending conditions. So your basic locking script is just send to a public address, and what's next is inputs are a reference to a previously confirmed output, and that unlocking script has to contain the proof to satisfy the locking script in the output that you're referring to. So again, the simplest version, I have a private key, no one else knows it, and I'm the only one who could possibly sign for the locking script in the output that I'm trying to spend. So inputs, outputs, transactions. This little graphic down here, just to show you the life cycle of this, right? You construct the transaction first, then it gets validated, then it gets confirmed, after which the outputs of that transaction can be used as inputs to construct later transactions. So yeah, just some basics there, keep that in mind. So here's an idea: multi-sig wallets for partnerships. A 2 of 2 multi-signature wallet. Each partner has one key. Obviously, there's a trusted relationship here. So if you're both contributing funds into the multi-signature wallet, that can represent sort of skin in the game. If you're embarking on a business venture with your best friend, you both put a little bit of money in, and you both control where that money goes. If it's not a friend, but if it's somebody. There's a cryptographic enforcement here that may be a little bit more reassuring, maybe a little bit more useful. But if you guys can't agree, the funds just don't move. So you could get the Bitcoin could get stuck in there. There's ways around this. But yeah, basically, this is a basic idea here for maybe forming some partnerships using multi-sig wallets. Similar idea here. Company boards. Several people on the board. Let's say M of N. So N total keys would be each board member gets a key, and then the amount of signatures required, the amount of votes that you need to spend some money, make a decision, make a new hire, that would be the M. So if M board members cannot agree, the funds don't move. There's something called threshold signatures that can basically make this, you can think of 100, 200, 1,000. You can almost maybe even have like employee unions, something like this, where you guys can have a vote in a portion of the company funds. That might be interesting, but there we go. So there's stuff you can do on chain like key rotation. So with an on-chain transaction, you could basically change the keys required for the board to make decisions on the funds. And so if you're removing a member, adding a new board member, that might work for your purposes. All right, doing good on time here. So sats flow, cash flow, that's the analog here I'm trying to draw. If you run a business, this is not very complicated. Revenues come in, payments that received by the business. Let's say it's over some period of time. Over that same period of time, you have a set of expenses. The expenses required to secure the receipt of R. This is just basic business, money in, money out. Don't go bankrupt. Don't take on too much debt. It's nothing complicated here. So the profits that end up, remaining, ideally it's positive. If it is positive and you don't need it for any more expenses because you've just deducted your expenses out, cash that in for long-term value accrual. Get a little percentage of your profits, put it away into Bitcoin for long-term storage, maybe pay some bonuses out. Again, this might be far future stuff where the volatility isn't so much of an issue. But again, I do this practically. I do basically a dollar cost average for my own business. I put a little away for the long term. There's also this idea we'll explore a little deeper. Obviously, E contains the payments to employees, so your employees are already paid. But do you want to maybe grant an extra percent as equity in your company out of that profit? It's something you might explore as a business. This is basically just a little more of that same idea. In any given fiscal year, you want to make sure that Bitcoin earned or Bitcoin purchased these days, as far as today, it doesn't exceed the amount of Bitcoin going out, Bitcoin sold. Especially if you're looking on a longer time horizon, the next 3 years, you don't need those profits. If you're actually thinking as a long-term business, maybe you put that away into a Bitcoin treasury, you start building that. And a Bitcoin treasury, we'll talk about it some more on the next slide. But this is something I personally do. I just put up a dollar cost average. I make sure that I have enough to cover my expenses, and my business is building a Bitcoin treasury. In my opinion, this could end up being kind of like the key indicator of economic health for a company. If you're shopping around for investors, valuations kind of are insane these days. We've seen, billions of dollars, or other companies that are worth billions of dollars, but are they really worth billions of dollars? Do we really know? They can take debt out at any time to finance whatever it is that they want. With Bitcoin, on a Bitcoin standard, if that Bitcoin's away in cold storage and secured by the company, that's a little bit more of a solid grounding if you're about to invest and you're gonna bet on this company, take a risk on by investing in them. You might want to make sure that they have a Bitcoin treasury available. You could do some kind of cold storage scheme, right? So you can split up your keys like we were just seeing before. They could all belong to the same person, belong to different board members, but the geographic distribution is interesting. Jurisdictional, like if you want to, it depends on the country you're in, right? I'm an American, I'm used to American laws. but not everybody has, I guess, the privilege in certain senses to have a legal system to fall back on if you ever need to, for whatever reason. If you're in a place like, I don't know, Venezuela, somewhere a lot more corruption in their governments, maybe you want to split up the custody of your cold storage wallet so that the government can't come knocking on your door. You literally say, I can't, it's literally halfway across the world. You cannot seize my company's funds. So yeah, a little bit of censorship resistant there. Having a Bitcoin Lightning node, actually with the BTC Pay server, this is something I do. You maintain that, the company maintains it. Again, at this stage, it's very much to kind of support the R&D, open source development of the Lightning Network. It's very new, it's very early, but maybe one day you're actually paying your expenses out of your actual full node. This idea here, programmable company incentives, is something I'm going to dive into a little bit. But yeah, like I mentioned on a previous slide, the equity ownership in the company, can that be, should we use the blockchain? Should we use multi-signatures for this kind of scheme where you can basically guarantee that your employees will have a percentage of the Bitcoin treasury? Something like yearly dividends that you can get paid out. So yeah, these are some ideas. Bitcoin onboarding. So yeah, this is a little bit more of a practical example. I do this for all the contractors that I work with. I don't pay them in Bitcoin necessarily. I agree, on dollar terms. This is what we're going to be working on. I'm going to pay you this much every month. However, what I do is after a job well done, I offer them a bonus, a tip, like unexpected. It's something that the person who's not, if they don't know anything about Bitcoin, they're like, why would you pay me in Bitcoin? They're not going to turn down free money. So this is the opportunity to, get them set up with a wallet, discourage the use of custodial wallets, or at the very least tell them, the risks, have that kind of onboarding path so that maybe they could eventually graduate to self-custody after they've learned a thing or two. So yeah, this is actually super effective because, again, like if you just tell them, hey, can I pay you in Bitcoin? They're going to be like, I don't know, what is that? You just pay them in how they want to be paid and then tip them. You're already budgeting for it. You can, do that on your back end. And, then you're onboarding your workers. At the very least, they hang on to some Bitcoin. Hopefully, they don't sell it. But yeah, then, that's just something I like to do. I don't like to shove Bitcoin down people's throats. I just think it's cool that I work with people in Venezuela, zip over some Bitcoin, some sats over, in a matter of seconds. And, they're like, oh, wow. They'll start to see it for themselves, So then I have this idea, right? So should I host nodes for these, for everyone I work for? Obviously just getting them up with the wallet might be a hurdle. Getting them to run their own node is a whole other thing. It's like, but at the same time, there's this whole, non-custodial. Kind of defeats the purpose, though, in my opinion. Trustless payments, that's what Bitcoin's for, might be overkill. Like you're working with this person. If you screw them over, they're going to leave, and that's it. The engagement's over. So yeah, I don't particularly do this, but I'm exploring the idea. Maybe, maybe there's some reasoning there. If you made it, I think you could create some incentives there. But at the very least, for educational purposes, like they can see that you have this cluster of nodes, where in theory that you just swap it out. Like they can run it at home, and then the same situation can continue, but they're in charge. They're fully in charge of their funds. So yeah, that's something I explore. Going to get into that a little bit more with Lightning channels, just in case you guys don't know. Lightning channels 101. You make an on-chain transaction. You make an on-chain transaction in order to open your channel. The amount that you use, the amount of Bitcoin that you use to open the channel represents now your capacity. The capacity is what regulates how much Bitcoin you can send back and forth. You can't send more than you lock into your channels. You can see over here on the right the source balance and the destination balance. That is what shifts around. Yeah, again, we'll get into this, but just in case you're not familiar with Lightning Network basics, you get a transaction on chain, and now you can use your channel for an infinite number of payments as long as they respect the capacity. So now I'm like, okay, can a Lightning channel represent some kind of service contract? Maybe, maybe not. I think it would kind of depend how you use it. So obviously the business in principle has to allocate some funds to pay for the service, pay for the salary. You do want to show the worker that you're good for the money. So I can see this being useful for proof of funds. A little bit more of a guarantee that you actually have the money. Whether or not you send it over the channel is a different story. But here's where I think there might be an interesting new programmable layer that doesn't necessarily need to be built into Bitcoin or Lightning. You just use it on top, and you kind of negotiate your terms, right? Like, you keep the channel open. If things go well, maybe it's a whole year passes you're working together. You've already sent all the money over, but at the same time, I like this idea of the inbound liquidity. Everyone knows. I mean, there's an issue with Lightning and inbound liquidity. It's an obstacle to onboarding because even if you open up a channel, you still don't have any sats on the other side to receive money. So opening up a channel on the company's side kind of might solve that problem a little bit, help grow the network. Just to cover some of these examples of this theoretical programmable layer, GitHub integrations. You can have issues in PRs for if it's a developer that you're contracting. Maybe it can be based on whether the issue. Maybe you spec the issue out before you start the contract, and when it gets closed, then that's what sends the money over the channel. Twitter integrations, for example, for marketing. Maybe you tell your marketing team, hey, make sure you do a post a week or 5 posts a day or whatever it is. Have a little server running that's kind of enforcing it and sending the sats on the fly. That could be cool to explore. And yeah, I feel like this might serve as a bit of a signal on like how healthy that business relationship is. Maybe the capacity you started with isn't big enough. Splicing is a method that you can use to make that channel bigger. Maybe you just close it out. Cool, didn't work out. I want my Bitcoin. At the same time, you could just leave it open and still disengage. That's fine too. But now you just if you have a channel, you might have other channels. I don't know. Closing that channel, I feel like could represent something like, okay, we're done working together, et cetera. So just keep moving here. Okay, so another interesting idea. I just want to make sure people are familiar with time locks in Bitcoin. So there's absolute, relative time locks, 2 different types there, and then each of those have their respective transaction level and script level time locks. Bear with me here. So an absolute time lock is defining a point in time that must be respected, presumably in the future, where you cannot spend the coins until that point in time has passed. Relative time lock, as you can deduce, is respecting the duration from the point, from the previous output, right? So as long as that's respected, you can do this at the transaction level, which is for confirmation. Remember that the graph about confirmation that comes basically, so it's not on the blockchain yet. It hasn't been confirmed, it hasn't been added, but the transaction is constructed, it is valid, and what one party or the other does with it is yet to be determined. It'll make sense in a second, but there's just 2 ways to do this: at the transaction level, and then you can also do it at the script level. So you can actually have a transaction with 10 different outputs, all of which have different time locks. Maybe some of them don't have any time locks. There's flexibility here with the time locks so that you can kind of pick and choose which output you want to constrain. And so here over on the right, a little bit some technical terms there. If you want to do some of your own research, those are the technical terms in the code base in the Bitcoin protocol spec that you'll find. Okay, so now that we have that kind of framework to work with, maybe we can imagine some way to construct capital commitments and investments using these schemes, right? So let's say, for example, Alice wants to invest 100 million Satoshis or 1 Bitcoin in Bob's company. Bob wants to know Alice is good for the money and actually committed to the company long term. So what Alice can do is create a transaction with multiple outputs, different time locks on each of them, and sort of release the sats in almost like tranches, right? So the first tranche is immediately available. This is something you'll see commonly in startups. It's like, okay, here's 25% of the committed money. Use it as you will, but the rest, I'm not going to give it to you until I see some kind of milestone being hit. And so you can have these 3 other outputs with 25 million sats each, but each have a time lock progressively increasing by a year. This is not the only construction. There's other ways to do this. But the important part here is Alice, when sending that transaction, she's paying the fee. The alternative is Alice can provide a signed transaction that would be valid if you broadcast it to the network, but she hands that over to Bob, knowing that Bob can broadcast it at any time, but again, he can't get the 1, 2, and 3 year locked outputs. So still in principle the same thing, and it's the fee. Who's paying the fee? That might be important in case in the far future fees, I mean, the whole idea is on-chain fees are going to increase, presumably. And so it might be expensive to make on-chain transactions. And so if it's the investor paying the fee versus the founder paying the fee, that might also create this kind of dynamic. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to broadcast this, but if you want to collect the, if you want to lock into this scheme, then you have to pay the fee. And again, you can do so much in here. This is so not even constrained to like once you broadcast. You can actually, in each of these inputs, you can have additional spending paths. So if you wanted to, for some reason, Alice could have just like a unilateral refund in any one of these outputs, if that's kind of how you want to construct this agreement. So yeah, there's lots of ways to do this. I built this slide and then I realized it actually would make a lot more sense here for just grants. Because obviously with this, I didn't even specify, well, how does Alice get ownership in the company? And like I mentioned, you can code in various rules into these outputs where, okay, Bob and Alice now share. Sort of, you can do like almost like a 1 of 2. So Alice could take the money back, or if it's a 2 of 2, they need to agree on where the money's going. So again, you can be very flexible with it. If it's just a grant, then you're good. It's even simpler. It's just like, okay, this is the grant, but like I want you, it's going to be released over time. And yeah, so let's keep moving here. Vesting equity. So you got startups, similar idea, but instead of investments, it's equity in your company. So Bob's has 100 million sats in the treasury, wants to hire Carol, offers a 10% equity stake. Again, similar. You want that long-term commitment. So again, you use time locks and multi-sigs. Bob creates one output with 90 million sats coming back to him. 4 more outputs with 10 million sats evenly distributed. And again, doing something similar. Again, I think I've explained the idea more or less already, but this Bob and or Carol, it could be whatever you want. If it's a 1 of 2, Carol can exit whenever she wants after the time lock has passed. After the time lock has passed, though, Bob, he can revoke it in a sense. Depending on the relationship between these two, you want to be careful about those rules. Or if it's a 2 of 2, then yeah, Carol has a say of where the money goes. Bob can't unilaterally take that back, but you do need Bob's approval to exit. This would be kind of like the equivalent of selling your shares. And I got just a couple more slides here. This one might be a terrible idea, but yeah, people have, 401k in the United States. It's like a retirement savings plan offered by employers. It's authorized by the IRS as a tax benefit, theft recovery, depending on your worldview. So employees basically can forego their salary, contribute payments, and the employer matches it. So it's kind of like, okay, well, if we both put money into this long-term agreement, then we put a time lock on it, and it's at least the employee's not just going to spend that money when it's supposed to be sort of a long-term thing. This is a complicated slide, and I know I'm running out of money. Let me make sure here. Yeah, so let's talk about this one. So like I mentioned, each one of these scenarios have various privacy implications. Maybe you don't want anyone else to know about these agreements. Maybe you do. Maybe you need transparency. So Taproot helps if you want a more private situation. But yeah, it's important to consider each of these things. Like I mentioned, the rising demand for block space may price out these use cases and just make it not make sense. But however, I think the ideas about interactive signatures, sharing custody, you can port that over and do a new software layer that runs on top, and you don't really need to use the blockchain if you don't have to. And yeah, I guess I'll quickly go through this one because it's kind of interesting. So there is a tax advantage here, at least in the United States. This is what I do personally. Consult someone else. Don't think this is the way to go about it. Everyone's different. Every business is different. But what you could do here, you're thinking, oh, well, if you're paying people in Bitcoin, isn't that incurring a capital gains tax? Like how you do all that accounting? Obviously, yes, I think you do need a robust accounting system that's tracking the price point at each of these points. However, if you use this, the strategy here, the IRS allows you to use last in, first out. So basically, say Alice, you buy some Bitcoin over the course of a year. The following year, you're buying Bitcoin at a different average price. When you spend that Bitcoin, when you send it out, just because it's higher than the first Bitcoins that you bought does not necessarily mean you incur a capital gain. You can use the more recent Bitcoin that you've stacked to sort of protect if that might have been at a higher cost basis. So you're actually incurring a loss, and you don't have to pay capital gains tax on that. So in a sense, as long as you're growing your stack while you're spending it and kind of getting this circular economy going, your lower cost basis Bitcoin, which would incur a capital gain, is protected because you have newer Bitcoin that you've bought, and you're electing this last in, first out method to kind of like track your capital gains. So obviously, if you sell it all, full capital gains are incurred. So it's a little tricky to follow, but yeah, this is a practical way until governments figure their shit out with the legal status around this stuff. But yeah, so those are some of my ideas. Hope you enjoyed it. Maybe they're terrible, but yeah, that's the talk. Thanks for listening.